They called it the perfect crime. No witnesses, no weapon, no confession, and yet, a man was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. For years, police academies studied this case. Prosecutors used it as an example of brilliant detective work. Journalists praised it as a rare moment when justice worked exactly as it should. But there was just one problem. The crime never actually happened the way everyone believed it did. And the man in prison, he knew it from the very first day. It all began in the early hours of a quiet autumn morning, when emergency services received a call that would change everything. A woman was found dead in her apartment. The scene was calm, too calm. There were no signs of forced entry. No neighbors had heard anything unusual. Nothing appeared to be stolen. To the investigators who arrived, it looked simple. This wasn't a random act. Someone she trusted had been there. Suspicion quickly narrowed to one person. A man with no criminal record, a stable job, and a completely normal life. He cooperated fully with the investigation. He answered every single question. He never once raised his voice. But this only made the police uneasy. They believed innocence should look emotional, fearful, maybe even defensive. This man was calm, too calm. Within days, the official narrative was set in stone. Prosecutors claimed he had planned everything meticulously. They argued that he had cleaned the scene perfectly, and that the complete lack of evidence was actually proof of his intelligence, not his innocence. The media immediately followed along. The headlines were brutal. Public opinion formed instantly. Before the trial even began, he was already considered guilty in the court of public opinion. In the actual courtroom, the prosecution's case sounded flawless. So-called experts testified. Detailed timelines were drawn up on whiteboards. Every gap, every inconsistency, was explained away with unwavering confidence. There was absolutely no direct evidence linking him to the crime. But there didn't need to be. The story they told just felt right to the jury. And in the end, that was enough. The verdict came back quickly. Guilty. Life in prison. As the guards led him away, cameras flashed and people in the gallery whispered amongst themselves. But as the courtroom slowly emptied, one crucial detail went completely unnoticed. The man didn't look defeated. He looked patient, because he knew something that no one else did. A single detail, something that was overlooked, dismissed, and ignored by everyone, would one day come back to destroy the entire case against him. And when it finally surfaced, it wouldn't just prove his innocence. It would reveal the terrifying truth about how easily our entire system of justice can be fooled. When the rescue team finally reached him, the man could barely stand. His skin was pale, his lips cracked from severe dehydration. But what truly frightened them wasn't his physical state. It was his silence. He didn't cry. He didn't ask a single question. He didn't even look relieved to be found. He just stared blankly at the horizon, as if a part of him was still trapped in a place he had just escaped from. Doctors later confirmed his body would eventually recover from the ordeal. But his mind, that was an entirely different story. Because what he experienced inside that featureless room wasn't just physical pain or deprivation. It was a calculated psychological assault. Every single night, at the exact same hour, the lights would abruptly turn off. There was never an explanation, never a warning. Plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness, he was forced to listen. The sounds started subtly. Footsteps pacing just outside his door. Indecipherable whispers that seemed to slither through the cracks in the walls. Sometimes, he'd hear faint laughter, cold and mocking, and other times, the most terrifying sound of all. Someone breathing, slow and steady, right on the other side of the door. But no one ever entered. The door never opened. Days bled into weeks. He completely lost track of time, and in the process, he began to lose track of himself. The isolation and the nightly torment chipped away at his sanity. At one point, he stopped screaming for help, not because he had given up hope, but because he came to a horrifying realization. They weren't trying to break him. They wanted him to survive. This wasn't a punishment. It was some kind of preparation. And just when he thought he had endured the absolute worst, when his mind had been stretched to its breaking point, they called his name, but it wasn't just his name. They called it in his own voice. A perfect, chilling mimicry. Not once, not twice, but over and over through the long, dark night. It was an exact replica of how he sounded, a vocal fingerprint they somehow possessed. How could they possibly know his voice so perfectly? And more importantly, why did they suddenly stop the entire experiment right after that night? What line had been crossed? The official report was brief and uninformative. It simply stated, unlawful detention, case closed. But one crucial detail was quietly redacted from the public files. A small, seemingly insignificant detail that might just explain why. 3 months after his rescue, the man disappeared again, and this time, he vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but the echo of a question we're all afraid to ask. What was he being prepared for? For years, the case stayed exactly where they wanted it, closed, archived, forgotten. The man's name slowly disappeared from the headlines, then from public memory, and finally, from all official conversations. But it never disappeared from the paperwork. Because no matter how carefully a story is constructed, paper has a habit of remembering what people want to forget. It all started with a routine audit, not an investigation, not a reopening. Just a young legal clerk reviewing old files, tasked with digitizing records before they were destroyed for good. He sifted through thousands of pages, thousands of cases, and then one folder just felt wrong. Not because of what was written inside, but because of what wasn't. The timeline didn't align. Key documents were referenced, but were never actually attached. Witness statements were summarized instead of being quoted directly. And most importantly, one crucial piece of evidence was mentioned repeatedly, but was never shown. It was simply labeled audio material, internal use, no transcript, no archive number, no storage location, just that one phrase. Curious, the clerk did something small, something he thought was harmless. He searched for that exact same label in other cases, and what he found changed everything. The exact same wording appeared in 3 completely unrelated files. Different cities, different years, different defendants, but always the same phrase, the same silence. All 3 men had something in common. They had all confessed, but only after long periods of isolation. There was no physical abuse recorded, no injuries noted. The only thing connecting them was one repeated observation, written by different doctors in different locations. Subject responds to auditory stimuli, not present in the room. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Someone wasn't just interrogating suspects, they were testing them. And the man from that so-called perfect crime case, he wasn't the first. He was just the one who survived long enough to realize what was happening to him. The clerk brought his findings to a superior, expecting praise, maybe even a promotion. The response was immediate and chilling. The files were reclassified, his access was revoked, and the clerk was transferred within days. There was no explanation. Just one quiet, firm warning. Some stories are closed for a reason, but it was too late. You see, the clerk had been smart. Copies already existed, and one of them ended up in the hands of someone who knew exactly what to do with it. A journalist who specialized in cases that never officially existed, the ones buried so deep they were practically myths. What this journalist uncovered next wouldn't just collapse the original case. It would force an entire system to quietly admit something truly unthinkable. That the crime was never the real experiment. The perfect crime was just a perfect cover story for a much darker secret. A secret that was never supposed to see the light of day. And now, thanks to one curious clerk, that secret is finally starting to unravel. They never reopened the case, not officially. There was no press conference, no apology, no public correction of the record. Why? Because admitting the truth would mean admitting something far worse. That this particular crime wasn't solved by clever detective work or groundbreaking evidence, but by systematically breaking a human mind. Years later, long after the headlines had faded, independent investigators and journalists started digging. What they uncovered was a playbook of psychological coercion. There were no bruises, no broken bones, no signs of physical violence. It was something more subtle, more insidious. Extended periods of isolation, deliberate sleep deprivation, hours upon hours of relentless psychological pressure. all cleverly disguised as routine questioning. It was a slow, methodical collapse, engineered from the inside out. Modern neuroscience and psychology now confirm what these investigators suspected. When the human brain is cut off from normal sensory input for long enough, no sights, no sounds, no human interaction, it does something strange to protect itself. It begins to fill the void. It starts to generate its own reality. You might hear sounds that aren't there. You might see things that don't exist. You start hearing voices that feel utterly real. And crucially, you begin to form memories of events that never actually happened. Under these conditions, a confession isn't just a string of words to the person saying them. In that moment of complete mental exhaustion, the confession feels true. The fabricated memories feel as real as any other. The story they're telling becomes their reality, a desperate anchor in a sea of psychological chaos. And what's truly unsettling is that this man's case wasn't some bizarre, one-off anomaly. When you look across different countries, different decades, and even different legal systems, you find the same horrifying pattern repeating itself. Men and women confessing in vivid detail to crimes they physically could not have committed. Not because they were liars, and not because they were guilty, but because their minds had been pushed past a breaking point. They were simply exhausted into submission. Some of those convictions were eventually overturned, but it was always done quietly, usually years, sometimes decades, after the fact, with minimal fanfare. The system corrected its mistake on paper, but it never broadcasted it. Other cases, however, were never touched. They remained sealed, closed, and filed away, because reopening them would force us to ask a question that no legal system, no government, wants to answer. How many perfectly solved crimes were never crimes at all? How many people are sitting in prison, not because of what they did, but because of what was done to their minds? The man at the center of this story was eventually let go. He wasn't declared innocent, mind you. He was simply released. There was no compensation for the years he lost, no official explanation for the sudden change of heart. His name remains sealed in dusty official records, a footnote in a forgotten file. But his case isn't forgotten. Today, it's studied in law schools and cited in human rights reports. It serves as a chilling warning, but it's not a warning about the cunning of criminals or the dangers lurking in the shadows. It's a warning about us, about our own certainty. It teaches us that the most dangerous thing in the pursuit of justice is not doubt. It's the unwavering, absolute confidence that we are right. Because once we lose our ability to question ourselves, the line between justice and cruelty begins to disappear. Thank you for watching. If this story made you think, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the hidden corners of our world.